In the last tutorial, we took some social network analysis data, cleaned it up in Excel in node edges, and then added latitudes and longitudes for locations, brought it into QGIS, and showed how we could visualize that network when it included location information. The product of this was not terribly useful. I would say that this, as a network graph, doesn't communicate much to anyone reading your work and looking at your illustration. The lines are confused, although it's got colors for the kind of relationship, some barely detectable differences in width depending on intensity. There's no labels for these. It's just not communicating a whole lot. So in many cases, the best thing to do is to simplify things, perhaps have multiple visualizations focusing just on a few individuals, or changing other things around in order to reveal some of the underlying patterns. We're going to look at one example of that today by focusing in on just two people inside of this network. Two things are a bit different from where we left off. One is that I changed the projection of the map to be an orthographic projection based on the latitude and longitude for Dalian. I did this by going up to Settings and Custom Projections, and then creating my own new projection by putting this text in here to the project string. You can copy and paste this and just change the latitude and longitude to where you would like to have it showing the globe centered on, in this case on the city of Dalian. The second thing is that if, depending on your zoom, because we were using labels of locations from the node table in which locations can be found overlapping for many individuals located in the same place, what I did is I brought in those locations from our third sheet and just imported this information as a CSV file and labeled it the same as it was before, turning off the nodes table. So when we're just depicting locations, this works just as well. One thing I didn't do in the last tutorial, which is always good practice, is anytime you bring in CSV files or you create scratch layers or you have virtual layers, is to save them as a native format such as GeoPackage or shapefile. So I'm going to do that now. Before saving it as a native format, I'm worried I'm going to lose all of this cool styling that we've done. So I'm going to go into the properties and first save the style down here as a QML style file. And I'm going to call it styles. Save this and press OK. Because watch what happens now when I export and save this as a GeoPackage. I'm going to call this our edges layer. I'm going to save it as the projection that I've been using, this ortho Dalian. If I turn off the old virtual layer, you'll see that we've gone back to this very simple styling without the curves. However, it's easy to restore that now by going into the properties and loading the style that I just saved. When I do that, all the styling is back, and I can now safely remove the old virtual layer. Just to be on the safe side, I'm also going to save my old table as a GeoPackage. Edges table, let's call it. Don't even think we need the CRS, but save that in there. Okay, I'm going to remove that one. And, well, I'm not going to be using the nodes table today, but I imported a CSV of the locations, so I'm going to save that as well. And let's save it as ortho. Let's call it the locations layer. Save that. And looks like we lost the styling again, so I'm going to go into here and save the styles for the locations. Let's call it location styles. Now I should be able to load the style for that from, let's see, location styles QML. And when I turn off the old one, everything looks like it just did a second ago. So now I can safely get rid of this locations one. I'm not going to need the nodes going forward. And some reason it doesn't show my orthodilian. Let's set that there. Okay, so I'm going to save this. I now have all of my stuff saved natively. Now, the next thing I'd like to do is I noticed that in my virtual layer, you may remember that I didn't bring in the names of the from and the to person. You can derive them from this ID from IT2 business, but it's already in the edges table. So I'm going to join these two together again and grab that from stuff, the name. The way I do that is I choose the table I would like to join to. They're going to have the same ID number because basically these two are the same thing, except one of them is depicted on the map and one of them isn't with geographic information. And I forgot, or rather I didn't include the from and the to information. I'm now going to do that. So now those two layers are, again, when you join something, it's always good to again save that so that you don't have a dynamic join. You don't have that join saved in memory. Let's call it the edges layer joined. And I'm going to load the style that we had for that. What was the name again? Not the locations there. It's this one here. Good, and now I can get rid of this. So now I should have a joined layer, and I can confirm that if I open up the attribute table. Now I see the names that correspond to this from and to, and it's pulling this in from the edges table, which we can see when we open up this attribute table here, the from and the to. I think that's going to be useful later if we want to start playing with labels. Okay, so now let's try to simplify this map down. Why don't we show just the connections of two key individuals? I noticed, for example, this Yoshinobu person has lots of people here connected. And let's include Fumiko as well. There are 3 at least there, probably some on the other side. How can I show this map, but only the connections involving on one side or another Yoshinobu, and on one side of another Fumiko? I could do this with a single filter that boils it down to both. But it's going to be easier to play with styling and such if I just duplicate this. I'm going to duplicate this, and we'll have one of them. Let's rename this one all the Yoshinobu connections, and let's rename this one all of the Fumiko connections. And now I'd like to filter on this. If I filter on that layer, and I want to say that any of the relationships are named Yoshinobu. If we test that, it finds 6 cases. Or that Yoshinobu is in the present in the to field. Let's test it now. So there were 2 more cases where he was in the second of them. So now this will find all cases where there is a relationship between Yoshinobu and someone else, either starting from Yoshinobu or ending with Yoshinobu. Notice that the name of the table is in double quotes. The string that I'm matching is in single quotes. And I could have just as well done this expression using the ID from ID2 if I knew the ID number for Yoshinobu. I could have searched on that instead. If I click OK now, I've got Fumiko turned off for the moment, but now we're seeing just the connections that Yoshinobu has. Let's turn off Yoshinobu for a second. Let's filter Fumiko down the same way. I'm going to filter and search for any case where the from name is Fumiko, or when the to name is Fumiko. Let's test that. 6, so it looks like we saw before there were 3 in the from, and there must be 3 more in the to. We click OK, and now we can see that put together, we've got 2 little mini networks here. Now, what can we do to style those? Now, we could have filtered down on a single layer, but what's nice about just duplicating that layer is now it's a lot easier for me to just go in to the styling panel here. Before, we had the color vary depending on the type of the relationship, but I tell you what, instead I'm going to filter on, let's see, I'm going to filter on the color depending on whether the relationship is from Yoshinobu to somewhere or from somewhere else to Yoshinobu. How about we do that? So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to clear this filter, and I'm going to build a conditional statement. And basically I'm going to say case when, and let's just put this in English for the time being, if the relationship starts with Yoshi, then I'm going to have it be the color BD0827. Otherwise, it'll be the color F09EAC. And so how do I test if the relationship starts with Yoshi? Well, basically, it's going to be when the edge table, let's see, what is it called? From, edge table from is equal to Yoshinobu. And let's apply that. Okay, look what happened now. Now, in the case where the relationship is going from Yoshinobu to someone else, it's a dark red. And in the case where the relationship is from someone else to Yoshinobu, it's gone kind of a lighter red. Let's do the same thing for the Fumiko. I'm just going to go and copy the exact same code that we just wrote. Go back to Fumiko and go down to the styling color. And I'm going to, first of all, it's nicer just to clear this here and go back into edit. I'm going to paste. This time we're searching under Fumiko. So in the cases where it goes from Fumiko, then how about we do some different colors? I wrote some colors down here. How about we have 00009C for that case and the color D3D3FC. Where are you getting these colors, you might ask? Basically, you can write down some colors that you're interested in by playing around with the color wheel here and then seeing the HTML notation that pops out. So I did that beforehand and wrote down a couple of colors. And now let me apply that, and you can now see, if I turn off Yoshinobu for a second, you'll see that we have some cases where the relationship is going from Fumiko and some in which they're going to Fumiko, if you have a directional network, for example. So if I take away this for a second, I would argue that this is a more useful chart or graph already. You've made things a lot simpler. You've cut it down to just a couple of key individuals. And we could even, let me turn on the layer styling again. We could even make the arrows a little bit clearer. Let's take the arrow width at start up to 2. And let's take up the head length up to 5. And the head thickness up to 3. And that makes our arrows a lot clearer, maybe a little too much, to be honest, but whatever. What did I say for this one? 2 for the arrow width at start, the head length 5, and the head thickness 3. So you can make them more pronounced. What if we wanted to label these with the person that it's going from and the person that it's going to? Well, we could do some conditional labeling. If we turn on the labels here and we say single labels, it will by default just give you the option. Let me see if I can make it so that you can see everything here. If I just say who it's going from or who it's going to, that's one way of doing it, right? If I do that, then notice that we now have names kind of in the middle. This is problematic for a couple of reasons. One is it doesn't tell you the from and the to, so how won't we do that? Instead of doing it by a particular table, we could again create a kind of a formula here. We could say, I want to have the from, and then you use the plus to concatenate a string. So that means I want to add a space and then to, and then I want to add the name of the person it's going to. Expression is invalid. That's because I'm missing a quotation mark. So for example, Yoshinobu to Tomohiko. If I apply that and I change the font to something a little clearer, for example, let's turn off the layers for the locations and zoom in our map a little bit. All right, so now we're just playing with Yoshinobu, but do you see how these labels are not working out for us? Why? They're not working out because the labels are ending up on the straight line, not on the curved line that's created when we turned on the arrows. So it's really hard to tell who's who here. One way that you can tell who's who is by going into your attribute table. Let's say I want to say which one is this Kyungmin and Yoshinobu. I can say flash fill. So if when you right click and you choose flash feature will flash the straight line between the two. So that'll tell you which one's which. But how can we fix it so that the labels are on top of the lines? Now there may be some funky cool way you could do this with geometry styling. But one really simple way to do this is to use the label toolbar, which if you don't have it turned on, I would turn it on. And then you can use this button here, move, label, or diagram. And if you have the right layer selected, select the layer that you want, the primary key, let's say FID there. Now I can move this and I can drop it on top of the line. And notice that when I did that, it put it over there. I'm actually going to move it a little bit over here. And then this one corresponds to that one here, in fact. This one corresponds to this. that one corresponds to this. It's a bit finicky. That one corresponds to that. It changes the orientation of it as well. And that corresponds to this. So, in other words, I can do this manually, is another way of saying this. Now, it'll mess up if you zoom out or zoom in. So choose the zoom you think you're going to export your graph at, and then mess with the location of the labels at that point. There's another way that you can do this besides this manual moving of labels. Let's turn this label off, and we can turn on Fumiko as well, for example. Let me switch to this. What if I want to have curved layers on the lines themselves? One way that you can do this is by using a method used by Klaus Carson on his YouTube channel. I'll put a link to the video where he explains how to do this. You know what? Something I'd like to get rid of here is, since we don't have that many different things anymore, I'm going to get rid of the offset so that it doesn't keep reloading and randomizing, so the arrows point directly at the thing. Okay, so the Klaus Carson video shows you how to create curved labels in arbitrary locations. And it works like this. You create yourself a new line layer. I'm going to save it as a geo package. Okay, and I'm going to call this my line labels. And they're going to be lines. And I'm going to save them in the same CRS that I'm using for my project. And it doesn't really matter. Well, I just need to have a field where I can put the label in, basically. So this is a line now. And if I edit this layer, I can draw on top of this curve 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and right click to stop it. And I could label this, you know, ideally I would know beforehand who these two individuals are. Let's just call this the Korea to Japan network, for example. I could turn off the symbol for it, but turn on the label. Turn this into a curved label using the label field. And let's switch the font to something a little clearer. And the result is quite attractive, depending on the zoom, of course, that you're using. Let's get rid of that line again. Yeah. I should have done a better job of drawing the line, but if you decide what zoom you want to use it on, you can then draw labels onto everything. So let's do another one. I'm going to do another one here. I'm going to put a little bit underneath the line, and then I'm going to right click, and let's call this let's call this the Seoul Busan connection, and it'll automatically get added. You can play around with, once you've added all your things, you can play around with the label placement. If I go in here, I can say I can offset it, or I could put it at a certain distance from the line. Let's see. Where do I want? Distance. It's not seeming to add much in the way of distance. Yeah, it is. So if I put 10 distance, it should be quite far out. So you could go around and manually create these kinds of curved labels for different spots on the map. It's a bit finicky, as with most things like this, but that might be one nice way of labeling your map. Finally, maybe another thing I would like to do, by the way, the labels will disappear or appear depending on the settings you have in labels for how it'll handle different zooms. There are some nodes that I'm not using. So how do we get rid of those? To be honest, the easiest way is to edit the layer that shows them. And if we select some of these features, I'm going to turn on the selection of features. I'm going to hold down my command key so I can select multiple items. I don't need this one. I don't need Tegu. And I think that's all. And I can literally just press the delete key and save my changes. Another way to have done it would be to filter on the locations layer and just show certain one of them not matching a particular thing. And once I've got that layered, then this might be the kind of map that shows some pattern that I want to talk about, for example, in my text. All right, so simplification is the major message here.